In this video, I'm going to take a look at tracing a Python program around a boundary. And I'm going to do so with reference to this computer program, which you've seen in all of the videos that have appeared so far in the playlist. I'll quickly remind you of the structure of this computer program. You can see that this line is responsible for creating a list of data, where the data is 35, 10, and 2, which respectively is the hours worked, the hourly rate, and the overtime rate. This line will invoke this method and will pass the data to the method, and here we have a selection construct that's necessary to implement the algorithm for calculating the gross pay, and here we return the gross pay to this position, which is assigned to weekly wage, and then we print the weekly wage. And we've looked at this previously in the playlist, where we used different data here. We used it when this was 34, we used it when this was 36, and you can see here it's 35. To perform the trace, I need to consider this bit of the computer program. And you can see it is saying hours worked is greater than or equal to 35. So we can see that this 35 is going to be important because I'll be asking whether hours worked is greater or equal to 35. To help me decide upon what the boundary tests are going to be, I'm going to use this diagram that's come into view. And you can see in its center we've got 35. And that's because the conditional test has got 35 within it. And you can see down here that I'm setting the data for this program to 35. Now, in the previous program that we looked at in the last video, the hours worked were 34. We tested the program and predicted what the output was going to be. The program that appeared in the video before that chose 36 as the hours worked, and we looked at what 34 hours work would give us as the gross pay, and we looked at what 36 hours would give us as the gross pay, bearing in mind that the 36 hours is actually containing 1 hour's overtime. Now in this video I'm going to set the hours work to 35, as you can see down here in the data. And then we're going to run the program and see what the output will be when we set it at 35. So when we consider the boundary test, we will see that the video before last tested the computer program when we made the hours worked 34. This computer program, I've made the hours 35, and the one before the last video, I made the hours 36. So we can see that we're testing the program at the boundary, which is 35, below the boundary, which is 34, and above the boundary, which is 36. So let's now perform the trace. You can see here that I have created a list that contains these values, 35, 10, and 2. And I'm invoking this method, and I'm passing in the details, but you can see in front of the details you've got this asterisk, which means it's going to go to this list and unpack it into its individual elements. And I'm showing those individual elements appearing now. And you can see it's the 35, 10, and 2. Now these values will now be passed to the gross pay function, as you can see here. So the 35 is given to hours worked, the 10 is given to hourly rate, and the 2 is given to overtime rate. Looking to this conditional test, we can see it is asking, is hours worked greater than or equal to 35? Well, we can see that the hours worked is indeed 35. Consequently, this conditional test is asking, is 35 greater or equal to 35? Well, it's not greater than 35, but it is equal to 35. Consequently, this is true. As this conditional test is part of the if-else selection construct, the next program statements to execute will be these. And of course, the program statements following the else, i.e. these, will not be executed. Consequently, this is the next program statement to execute, and you can see that it is subtracting 35 from the hours worked, and of course we can see the hours worked are 35. This calculation will therefore give us 0, and that 0 is assigned to overtime hours. Moving on to this program statement, we can see that the hourly rate, which is 10, is multiplied by 35. Consequently, this calculation will give us 350, which is assigned to normal pay. This is the next program statement to execute, and you can see it is performing this calculation, and it is asking you to multiply the overtime hours by the hourly rate and then by the overtime rate. Well, we know the hourly rate is 10 and we know the overtime rate is 2, but the overtime hours were calculated on this line to be 0. Consequently, this calculation will be 0, and the 0 is then assigned to the overtime pay, which is 0, because there is no overtime because the worker has worked exactly 35 hours. We then execute this line, and what it's going to do is to add to the normal pay, which we've just calculated to be 350, the overtime pay, which we've just calculated to be 0. So this calculation is 350 plus 0, which is 350, and that is returned to this position where it is assigned to weekly wage. And of course, this line then prints out the weekly wage, and you can see the runtime appearing now, and you can see it is 350. So in conclusion, we've seen that with this computer program, we've seen again how we can unpack a list so that the elements of the list can be sent as individual arguments to the function. And we've also considered the boundary testing for a computer program. So this video and the previous two, when you look at them together, show you the boundary tests that we will have gone through when we're testing this computer program.